we still have quite a few people signed up who haven't joined, but I think they're going to slowly trickle in. So we'll get started if that's okay, Isabel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jermaine.
So thank you everybody for attending. My name's Dr. Jermaine Revalier. I would just like to introduce you to Baroness Laurie Burt. Baroness Burt was born and raised in West Midlands and a former MP for Solihull, and in fact the first Lib Dem MP for the area, and turned around a huge Tory majority. In 2010, she became the Business Innovation and Skills Co-Chair, and then private secretary to Danny Alexander, and in 2014, Assistant Government Whip, and in 2015, spokesperson for the Business Innovation and Skills. So thank you very much, Laurie, and would you like to take over?
Thank you very much indeed, Jermaine, and good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome from me and from the panel as well. This webinar is going to consider the question, Lady Justice, has she failed women? Now, I want to, the first thing that occurred to me is, why? Why is justice a lady? Is it the statue? And was the man who created that statue having a bit of a laugh? This is, I just think it seems crazy to me because women have not been considered, I think, very much in the justice system, and for generations, in my considered opinion, the justice system has kept women in their place, which is down. So this is the interesting question that we have, and I'm looking forward to some people challenging that idea this evening. Now, unfortunately, it's your bad luck that in a place which is packed full of lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, but I am a lawmaker, and I think that one of the things that has really occurred to me since I've been in the Commons and latterly in the Lords is just what an important area that is, because we make the laws, and the importance of including everyone. I was speaking on the second reading of the domestic abuse bill last week, and I was saying, you know, the most important thing is we must include everyone. And if you have a room of lawyers or any other decision-making group, and you don't have women in there, or you don't have people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, or LGBT plus, or disabled, or any other group, if they're not there present in the room, they're not thought of. And I don't think that people who make the laws, men mostly, it's not that they're seeking to discriminate against any group, but they just don't think of us. And that's why it is so, so important that we make sure that our law includes everybody. And I just mentioned the domestic abuse bill, and it's quite nice. We've got a diverse leadership from my own team, the Liberal Democrat team. It's got two leaders, the team bill, and one's a girl from Dudley, and the other one is a gay man who is in fact a victim of domestic abuse himself. So we're trying hard to make sure that we do include everyone. And just digressing to the domestic abuse for a second, it is a good bill. It's a very good bill. It's already been through the Commons, but every bill goes through one house and then through the other. This one started in the Commons. It's got some really, really good bits to it, but it could be better. So at the moment, we are trying to use our once in a generation opportunity to make sure that people who suffer from domestic abuse, and that's everybody, can benefit from better protection from the law, because it will always happen. and that some of our speakers tonight will be sharing some of their experience from all around the world of the kind of abuse that takes place. And it's tragic and it's sad, but nevertheless, you know, we must do what we can do and make sure that we pass that message on. And those of us who are involved in the law, then we must take our responsibility very seriously indeed. So I'm going to introduce you to our two co-chairs this evening. First of all, the first is Isabel Parasaram, and I always get a name wrong, no matter how many times I try. But I'm trusting that you've had a look at some of these biographies, because I think that Isabel just has the most impressive biography, and makes me tired, quite honestly, to think about all the things that that she does and has done. And in the biography, she's basically done a lifetime's work already. And just when you think, well, how old is she then? You know, she's done so much. You then learn that she's got 4 kids of school age. And you do think, well, you know, it's just not fair, really. I mean, look at the woman, for goodness sake. So Isabel, I think, is really someone to watch for the future, leading in the world of law. And from my own point of view, Isabel chairs the, he is the Vice President of the Liberal Democrat Party, and I hope that there'll be a great future for her as well in politics, because I think she's got a lot to give. Anyway, I'll stop the advert now and go on to Jermaine, Dr. Jermaine Revalier. He is, he's got things in common with me, not politics necessarily, but we're both first in our families to go to university, and we're both passionate about diversity and also about well-being. And I think that's so important. You hear a lot said about well-being, but Jermaine talks about and specialises in public servants in the NHS, and also social workers. And he and I both would agree, I'm sure, that every person deserves to be able to bring their whole selves to work, and people who can do that are more productive, they are more happy, they have less time off, and the whole system runs so much better. And I can only imagine and what's been happening with the NHS, and also with social workers who've had to pick up a heavy load of all the problems that have happened behind closed doors in the pandemic, and the suffering that has gone on. I don't know how you do it. I really, really don't. And it does make you wonder, you know, are we turning the corner here? Are people at last starting to recognise the true value of these public servants who put themselves in the front line? And are they likely to ever be recognised and paid the money that they deserve? Well, that last question I have a concern about, but I won't go into, because I might stray into politics, and that would be a very, very naughty girl thing to do. So I won't do that. So moving on then, let me just introduce our panel very briefly. We have Dr. Elaine Storkey, I'm so sorry. Elaine, forgive me. I went through all the pronunciations as well before we started. So I think Elaine's going to bring a real philosophical and sociological perspective to our discussion this evening. And I'll be really interested, as I'm sure you will as well, to hear about the results of her worldwide perspective on violence against women, a tool of control, which is unfortunately universal in our world. It's a very sad thing to say, but I'm sure that's going to be really, really interesting to hear of Elaine's experience. Then we have got Judge Mariam Sayed, and I can't wait to hear about her experiences. She has been involved in some extremely notorious cases, and also areas of particular interest to me: honour-based violence, forced marriage, domestic abuse, etc., etc. And of course, diversity and inclusivity in the legal profession. And then last but definitely not least is Amanda Pinto, who's working where the real crime is. I'm talking about the people who get away with big money crime, powerful people, usually men, who are really, really hard to bring to book, but could defraud more in one day than a whole load of petty criminals could do in a year. And so it's hugely important, the work that you do, Elaine. And as chair of the Bar Council, she instigated a leadership programme to get more diversity into the profession. So I think you'll agree, we have a tremendous group of individuals tonight. I hope that you'll have a really interesting and delightful evening. And I'm now going to hand you back to Jermaine.
Thank you. Isabel, do you want me to just read out our quick message from Ed?
That would be fantastic. And then I will run through what's happening tonight. So we're just having a statement from Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He couldn't be here today and he just wanted to share a few words in his absence. So Jermaine's going to read that for us.
Ed says, I'm sorry I can't join you all this evening for what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion, but I did want to give my thanks to Isabel for arranging this event on such an important topic and for assembling such an impressive and distinguished panel of speakers. Whether it's reducing the number of women in prison or increasing the number in the judiciary, or urgently improving the way sexual assault is handled throughout the criminal justice system, I'm determined that the Liberal Democrats lead on these issues as part of our mission to build a fairer, more equal and more just society. So although I can't be there, I hope you enjoy this evening and I look forward to hearing all about it.
Thank you very much, Jermaine. So for all of those attending, you may see people disappearing off screen. Laura Lee, in theory, is going to disappear so that she can relax and enjoy the rest of the webinar while the speakers are put through their paces. But you can relax, speakers, just for a few moments while I run through what is going to happen today. So I will be chairing today and I'll be assisted in that by Germaine Revalier, Dr. Germaine Revalier, who's on my vice president's team. And he will be co-chairing, just looking at what's happening in the chat, highlighting any questions, and generally just keeping an eye on proceedings and being able to flag anything that we need to cover or that we've missed. So please do keep your questions coming. I know that a lot of people tend to wait until the end and we won't have time to cover everything. So get your questions in early and they're more likely to be covered. So what will happen is that you will put your question in the chat and then one of us will highlight it. And probably what we will do is not ask the same question of all of the speakers, just so that we give every speaker a chance to talk about their particular subject and so that we cover as many questions as we possibly can. So just bear in mind today that the speakers are here not because they have a particular political alliance. It's not really a political event that we're running, even though it's something that I'm running through my office. So I just wanted, out of respect for the fact that the speakers have agreed to be here today, just to emphasize that point. As we go through the session today, we can't necessarily control everything that's happening in the chat. So if you see something as an attendee that's offensive or that you want to challenge, then please feel free to respond within the chat. But please forgive us if we don't catch everything. We will only use first names, hopefully, because I'm just very aware that because this is being recorded and might be shared on social media, I don't want to identify anyone by their surname. So we will endeavour to do that. I'm hoping that there is a hashtag for social media that one of my team will put into the chat. So if you want to tweet anything, just make sure all of us are looking good and looking into the camera before you take a photograph and then put it out on social media. So hopefully that hashtag will go out into the chat. We will break eye contact as we're speaking, and not because we're looking at our phones for interesting messages, but because we've got paperwork, or, you know, I've got a list of questions here that I will be asking. So please excuse us if we don't keep eye contact with you, but that's basically what we will be doing. And I just wanted to say thank you immediately to the team behind all of this. You'll see, perhaps you'll have heard Alex, who's running our digital support behind the scenes, but he's done an amazing job. He always does. And as we go through, I will thank different people just to make sure that everybody hears the work that they've done, rather than keeping it to the end when people start to log off. But hopefully you won't log off. I just wanted to flag to you that our next event will be on disability. It's called What Does It Mean to Be Disabled in Britain in 2021? And that will be on the 11th of March. So do put that in your diaries. It's a Thursday at 7 o'clock again. I have talked about questions, so that's good. And the fact that this is recorded on social media. If you're not speaking, then please mute your mics, but keep your video on if you're a panelist. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that I'm aware that both Amanda and Mariam are officially part of the judiciary, but we have to be somewhat careful about what we ask them or what they can say. So rather than me trying to second guess the etiquette or where we're going wrong or right, please let us know if we've done or said or asked anything too intrusive, because I know you're bound by very strict rules. Mariam constantly reminds me of that. So do feel free to correct us, because we have to treat you somewhat with kid gloves from that point of view. So I think that's all that I have to say. What I'd like to do now is just to go to our speakers so that you can introduce yourselves briefly, and perhaps you could just share with us as well why you accepted this invitation to speak tonight. So would you like to start, Elaine?
Yes, indeed. The last question is very easy. I accepted the invitation because Isabel asked me. And I know that anything Isabel takes on is really going to be first class, and I just didn't want to miss the fun. And actually finding out who I'm a fellow panelist with has been great too. And I'm really looking forward to contributions from the two of you. I can't wait to hear both of you. Yes, I'm Elaine Storkey. I've been around in academic circles for a lifetime, and also in very practical ways. I've been involved in counselling people and in an NGO called Tear Fund, where I was travelling constantly in Africa and Asia and so on. And for me, as a woman president of Tear Fund, as well as a woman academic and so on, I think I've been on a lifetime journey of getting to know far more about women and about the needs of women, but also about the oppression of women and the inequalities women have faced globally. So that's really my interest, and it drives me every day to think and pray about where we should be going as a future society.
Thank you, Elaine. Would you like to introduce yourself, Amanda, and let us know why you're here?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for asking me to be here. That was the first part. I was asked, and I was really delighted to talk about something that's very close to my heart, because I think at root what this is about is access to justice and actually the rule of law, and both of those things are incredibly important to me. And I think the impact of our system of justice and indeed my profession and the judiciary on women, and the involvement and engagement of women in both the profession and the judiciary, and if I may say so, those who legislate for us, is incredibly important. So I'm here to discuss those issues with you all. As I've been introduced, I was chair of the bar until the 31st of December. And the reason that I wanted to stand in the election was really to promote those values that I've just spoken about, and also to talk about how we can make the profession and the legal system in this country better for everybody, more inclusive, more diverse, and better representative of the society that we serve. So for me, those were the bar is a really important part of that, and it was for that reason that I stood for election. And just my day job, which I'm now doing much more full-time again, is being a barrister doing fraud, corruption and corporate crime. And I'm author of a textbook on corporate crime and also on sanctions. And I contribute to Blackstone's criminal practice on corporate crime. So as Laurelie kindly introduced me, I rather love the idea that these people make more than petty criminals would make in a year. I think probably a lifetime is more likely, or even several lifetimes probably. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Amanda. And Mariam, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know why you accepted this invitation?
Well, Isabel, thank you. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I'm Mariam Syed. I'm only occasionally known as Judge Syed. I'm sometimes known as Miss Recorder Syed, and most of the time I'm just Mariam. I became a barrister in 1993, and then I became a Crown Court recorder, part-time judge in 2012. And then a tribunal judge in 2019. So I wear different hats like Amanda does. The moment I joined this profession, diversity and inclusivity was something that was very, very important to me, and it has remained important to me in the, gosh, now 28 years that I'm now approaching at the profession. And it's something, as Isabel knows, I regularly speak about. And the position of women in the legal profession is something that has been very much at the forefront of the practice that I have chosen to develop in those 27, 28 years. You'll see from my bio that the work I do is to do with rape, serious sexual abuse, domestic violence, honor-based violence, forced marriage, all the matters that I suspect we'll be talking about. And I'm sure it'll be something that we cover, but one of the things that I'm very keen to do, both as a judge and as a practitioner, is to deal with the unconscious bias that undoubtedly exists in the criminal justice system, in terms of how people are treated, in terms of even how lawyers and barristers and judges behave, and the myths and assumptions that often exist in relation to women. And so I was very much delighted to be asked to speak this evening on what I think is a really important topic.
Lovely, thank you, Mariam. Well, I wasn't going to start with this, but as you've raised it, talking about unconscious bias and the law and the legal system itself, would anyone like to comment on where they see these difficulties and what changes have happened in the last decade or so, and where you see the room for improvement?
I can take that if you
want. Go ahead, Mariam.
I don't mean to cut across Amanda, but I mean, one of the things that I do is that I offer pro bono training to police officers and to the Crown Prosecution Service and NGOs in relation to the areas of law I practice in, and particularly in relation to things like controlling and coercive behaviour, where I take the lead in training a lot of police officers and prosecutors. It is absolutely trying to eat away at the unconscious bias that absolutely does exist, and it exists in all of us. And from the moment a police officer attends a scene, to try and see that practices evolve which recognise things that may not be completely obvious, the issues of whether somebody is being controlled, whether there is a cultural dynamic to what's being done, but to do that without preconceived ideas, without prejudice, and with respect for all who are involved, forgive me. And one of the things that I will say is that I'm not going to sit here and pretend that unconscious bias doesn't exist within the legal profession and the judiciary, because it does. And I have over the years had to firmly but politely speak to some of my colleagues to just talk about the way and things that I've heard, things that are said, and do so in a way that makes people want to think, but steers away from classic, I'm afraid, racist and sexist tropes, because I'm sure it won't be unfamiliar to many people here that if you are assertive as a woman, you can be described as difficult or prickly, or I've often been described as terrifying when I'm cross-examining somebody, which is a good thing, terrifying when I'm sitting as a judge. That I don't mind, as long as it's meant in the right way. Firm but fair is fine. And I think that there is very much work to be done. And if I may finally finish with this, I think one of the things that's happened is that the pandemic and lockdown and how the criminal justice system operates has really brought a lot of these unconscious biases to the fore. I was told I was the first Muslim woman to be appointed a Crown Court judge back in 2012. And so I'm often spoken to by my colleagues, and this is something I know Amanda will very much appreciate, because I know she's been working hard on this, that there's been a real issue about attendance at court, for example, between lawyers and defendants who are women or who are BAME, because of concerns about attending. I frequently, even now, have to send emails to judges saying, may I attend remotely, because I will be shielding, because I have 2 school-age children who I'm currently homeschooling. It's done with the best intentions, but there's still a road to go, I would say.
Thank you, Mariam. And I can certainly attest to Mariam's commitment to diversity and inclusivity. I've known Mariam for a very long time, and one of the first experiences I had of Mariam's commitment to justice was when I was a pupil barrister and in tears over something that had happened. And Mariam said to me, Isabel, you must never ever cry in chambers. We'll take it out and we will deal with this. And she was amazing in terms of just giving me the confidence in that situation to be able to deal with something that was quite challenging. And she has continued to be that kind of person, I'm sure, to many, many barristers who have followed her. So, and continues to be that kind of support to me today. So everything she has said is absolutely true and more. Amanda, would you like to speak? Because I know that you've done some incredible work in your time as chair of the Bar Council, and probably before then as well.
Thank you. So, I mean, your original question was, you know, have things changed over the last decade or so? And the answer is yes, undoubtedly they have. Are we anywhere near where we need to be? No, I don't think we are. I think there's a long way to go. But there have definitely been strides made. Having said that, I think there are a lot of societal prejudices and issues at the root. And just to pick up on what Mariam said, the criminal justice system, by which I mean the broadest spread of it, going from police on the street to prison and probation at the other end of it, and all of the justice system in between, every single stage of it has got issues and prejudices which affect those who come into the criminal justice system. It affects the ways they are treated and how they respond to it. And it also, I'm afraid, affects impacts. And we know that there are different impacts on people, for example, who are Black than there are for people who are white. And so I know this is mainly about women, but it's equally the case, I think, that there's an enormous amount of work to do in relation to all sorts of different issues to do with people who are not the traditional people, who white men who are in positions of authority, and how people are treated when they come into contact with courts, whether that's criminal courts or any other kind of court. I would be absolutely clear that there is still an inequality in the legal profession, and there is still inequality in the judiciary. Huge strides are being attempted, I am sure, but progress is slow, frankly. And for every step that you take forward, it's incredibly important that you don't roll back down the hill. And I think COVID-19 has been, I'm afraid, a real example of something which tends to push people back down the hill. So I think it's something that's had an impact well beyond the very obvious and terrible impacts that it's had on many, many people's lives in this country.
Absolutely, Amanda, and thank you for broadening the discussion, because you're entirely right. It's every minority group that is being severely impacted, particularly during this pandemic. And you brought to mind actually the efforts being made by the judiciary, or certainly those who are trying to help minority groups to become judges, because there is the pre-application judicial programme that I was a beneficiary of. So when they first advertised it, I applied. I was one of the first cohort to do it. And it was quite eye-opening, because I had ruled out any thought of a career as a judge. And had I not done that programme, I wouldn't have even considered it to be an option for various reasons. You know, there are incredible mentors like Mariam, you know, who are brilliant role models for people like me. But for some reason, sometimes even seeing that doesn't make it entirely real. It's, you know, there are those barriers, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but certainly doing that program was very, very useful. So there are those schemes, as we say, but there is also so much more that can be done.
Can I just touch on that just for a minute? Because
yes, sure.
One is the PAGE program was designed by the Bar Council, the Law Society, and the judiciary, the Judicial Appointments Commission, and it's a really good program. But the interesting thing is that they were not keeping tabs on who had gone through the program and been successful. So I don't know if they know that you have been successful as a result. And it's that kind of just slightly to change something or to add something into the mix. Data is so important. It's so important when you're making strides or trying to change things, to know what works and what doesn't work. So PAGE is a great thing, because it demonstrates to really suitable people who've got the aptitude that they're suitable, and they've got the aptitude when they don't think they have. So that's a fantastic thing. And I'm so delighted that you mentioned it. But I think it's something that we do need to keep an eye on, because programs can be made to try and help people, but if they don't capture whether or not they're successful, we never know whether or not they're going to actually give the results that we need, or whether they need to be changed a little.
That is so true, Amanda. I did the programme and promptly forgot that I had done it, to be honest, until this year when I was updating my CV. And it was very useful. A lot sunk in, and it opened my eyes to options that I could follow. But nobody has followed me up yet to find out what I have done with it. And perhaps if I had had that reminder, I would have, you know, pursued it or taken it a step further. But it certainly stopped at that stage. And I think I did it roughly a year ago. So that's a brilliant point that I haven't thought of. So thank you so much for that intervention. Elaine, do you want to comment?
Yes, indeed. I mean, a decade is a long time. And actually, so many things have happened in this last decade that my head is just swimming with them. But I think the key thing is the rising of consciousness. We are now much more aware of things in our own culture that we weren't aware of a decade ago. I mean, take female genital mutilation. We had no idea. Most people have very little idea 10 years ago, the rate that this was happening even in our own culture. And there were very few kind of campaigns that were very active campaigns to do anything about it. But now that's really kind of spread. A lot of people have been very active. People within the Islamic community saying it's actually got nothing to do with Islam, have come out in front and led the way on this. So lots of things like that in our own culture, even things on prostitution. the fact that we had former prostitutes who had been effectively taken into prostitution as young teenagers, 14 or 15, going to the High Court and saying, please, can we have our convictions expunged? Because we now can't do anything. They'd exited prostitution 12, 15 years ago, but they couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't get jobs looking after children. Even university courses were difficult to access and so on, because they had a long string of convictions which were there when they were soliciting on the streets. Why were they soliciting on the streets? Because their pimps had put them there. And it was, again, a collective of women who had exited prostitution and said, this is a fool's game, but we need to move forward on this. We need to actually be recognized that we are ordinary women wanting to make our way in life. They eventually took it to the High Court. And I mean, I was amazed at the High Court's response, because they didn't know what to do with these women. You could see the puzzle, and they delayed the sentences. And of course, they were eventually expunged. But it hasn't changed the law, and there's still a whole lot of things to do with regard to legislation on prostitution that I think we still need to work through. But then globally, so much has changed. I mean, in the Middle East and North Africa, huge changes in legislation have meant that a girl who has been raped need no longer marry her rapist, because that was a former condition. And of course, it's not that she would choose to marry her rapist, but her father would choose for her to marry her rapist, because it was better for the family. The family's name was not besmirched. His daughter was now catered for by a man who could take her off his hands and so on. And what kind of future was going to be the case for this girl now marrying a man who had been so violent and raped her in the past? Well, a ghastly future. But it was there enshrined in law. Whether or not she wanted to marry him didn't matter. And now that's been repealed, and it's been repealed from country after country right across North Africa, as people have seen the light and as more people have become active in the whole area of justice for women. And I could go on, but I just think it's been a good decade for all of those issues, but there's a heck of a lot more work to do.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I ought to add at this point, actually, that there may be students here or people who might be affected by the issues that we're discussing. So please be aware, if you weren't already from the introduction and the blurb as you booked, that we will be discussing sensitive issues. So if any sort of concern arises or you need any kind of support, I'm looking to Kevin and Jenny, who are on my team, to put the contact details of organisations that might be able to help, you know, in terms of rape crisis, Samaritans, etc. If you could put those details in the chat, that would be brilliant in terms of safeguarding the people who are attending. And if there are students attending, you may be fairly young, 16 or over, please be aware of that as we're discussing. And if anything gets too heavy duty, then please log off or ask a parent to sit with you or an appropriate adult. So that's fantastic, Elaine. Thank you for raising those issues. You did speak about FGM, and when I was looking at the data, as I understand it, there's only been one prosecution in relation to FGM in the UK. Is that right? Mariam's going to correct me because she's so brilliant at statistics. So go on, Mariam, please comment.
No, not trying to be a show. No, there's been a few prosecutions, but there's been one conviction, which was in February of 2019 at the Central Criminal Court in front of Mrs. Justice Whipple. And as I'm sure people will know, in fact, first legislation on the Act was actually quite some time ago. It was the Female Circumcision Act in 1985, which then became in 2003 the Female Genital Mutilation Act, and it's something I often speak about. And that the first prosecution, I think the first two, led to acquittals. Now, is that because there was something wrong with the legislation, or simply was that simply based upon the evidence? And I think there has been a great deal of comment about why there's only been one conviction in so many years. And I think it's for a lot of reasons. It's to do with culture. It's to do with the secrecy around these procedures and sensitivities. Many have argued it's to do with the fact that health workers don't properly comply with duties to report. It seemed to be tied up in religion. But there is very much work being done across police officers, across CPS, across the defence community to recognise these things. And what I think, leading to your first question, Isabel, we've seen in the last 10 years is that there has been a recognition in the law. And it very often starts, because I'm also a family practitioner, it very often starts in family law, and then it moves to crime. In fact, I've just done a piece on comparative law piece on family and criminal matters on controlling and coercive behaviour, where certain things are recognised to be criminal offences. So for those of us who've been dealing with domestic violence for many, many years, it may surprise you that controlling and coercive behaviour only became an offence at the end of 2015. It is something, in fact, I presided as a judge over one of the first ever trials, and I sort of have done a number of prosecutions, and it's still something that you do have to explain, because somebody who exerts violence on another person, and as we know, rape and domestic violence is very little to do with violence, really. It's to do with power. It's to do with control. To explain that hitting is a form of domestic violence, but actually controlling someone's day-to-day activities, isolating them from friends and family, isolating them financially, is actually a form of domestic violence. And the courts are making real inroads in recognizing that with the legislation and prosecuting these things. And there are specialist lawyers and specialist officers who now deal with forced marriage, FGM, deal with controlling and coercive behavior and honor-based violence. But there's still work to be done, but we are slowly going in the right direction.
Lovely, thank you very much for clarifying that, Mariam. So one of the Amanda, do you want to speak on that?
I just wanted to say, I think to sort of coordinate the 2 points that Elaine and Mariam have made, is that legislation is incredibly important in raising awareness. I know that might sound rather counterintuitive, but actually, if you want to change society, sometimes the way forward is to pass legislation. It doesn't necessarily have to be the cart, it can be the horse. And I think it's a really important thing in this particular case. And I take on board what Mariam said about coercive and controlling behaviour, as it were, being much more recognised in the family courts before it became a crime. But, you know, we should be thankful, I think, that it is a crime now, and it is recognised as such. And I believe that because it is now on the statute book, that people's understanding of it will grow and awareness of it will grow in the same way that it seems to me, and Elaine will know much more about this than me, I may be wrong, that FGM has become raised much more in the consciousness. So even though there's only been one successful prosecution, and you know that's almost certainly totally unrepresentative of what ought to be the position, but it is demonstrating society's attitude to it by the fact that it is a criminal offence, and I think that's incredibly important.
I think it's important too to recognise that very often we need people who are involved in those areas themselves to take the lead. So it's understandable, a lot of the women who have been bothered about female genital mutilation have been very angry with British people and with white British people who are legislators and so on, because they haven't actually been jumping up and down about this. And they've made the point quite justifiably. If this was a little white girl in a middle-class environment, we would be very angry that safeguarding laws weren't being passed in order to protect her properly. And of course, the answer to that is that we're very culturally aware of diversity and difference. And I think there's often an anxiety amongst indigenous populations about being looking as if they're racist, or looking as if they're crashing in on someone else's culture, and therefore holding back. But that in itself is actually racist in some way or another. It's saying, sort these out for yourself. It's not our business, when everything is our business if we're actually legislating for a just society in the United Kingdom. But it has been when people from within those communities have taken the lead, and written books and set up programs and actually done teaching programs of consciousness raising, that the penny has begun to drop. And most of what I've learned from about female genital mutilation, I've learned from the Somalian community or the Sudanese community or friends of mine who are writing books on the issue. And it's very, very important because they have the right to write. And someone like Hiba Wadri can write about her own experience as a cut girl and describe it graphically in a way that I can't, I may not, because it hasn't happened to me. I can only tell it secondhand. And so it's very, very important for people who are involved in the communities where these practices are rampant to come out and actually challenge everybody else to do something about it, because it's not their problem, it's our problem as a community and as a legislature in the United Kingdom.
That is so very true, Elaine. Thank you for raising that. Lynn has made a comment in the chat that I dare not read in polite society, but I'm going to pass neatly on to Jermaine, who's in charge of the chat, and he can read it if he wants to. It's up to your discretion, but let us know what's happening, Jermaine, please.
I think I might give that one a miss as well, actually. But we've got a question from Anna for the panelist. He's a prison officer in a female prison. And she says that she's found that the vast majority of residents have previous history of abuse, often at the hands of men. And I was looking at the stats around this earlier, and I think at least half of women in prison have been victims of abuse. So what measures would you suggest could be put in place to protect these women instead of punishing them?
Would anyone like to answer that in particular? So the question is, what measures would you put in place to protect the women who are subject to abuse and then end up in prison instead of punishing them?
I think if I can jump in, and then perhaps Amanda and Elaine, one of the things that I know all judges and practitioners are acutely aware of is what is the root cause of someone's offending. And so when, as a judge, I have somebody in front of me who may have got to where she is because of the fact that she herself has been the victim of domestic violence or sexual abuse, that is something that I very much bear in mind. It may not excuse the behavior, but it may explain and mitigate the behavior. And in terms of trying to help them, is you look at very much if it is a custodial sentence that is necessary, whether there are programs, whether it can be something in the community, whether it can be a suspended prison sentence. In terms of trying to actually stop it from the start, I think that's a more difficult question, because you are trying to effectively get inside people's homes, and people are entitled to be private in their homes, and you don't often see what's behind closed doors. So I think there has to be an awareness amongst all of us as society, I think, in the fact that we need to look for those telltale signs. If we see somebody who just only drops the kids off or comes back, what does that mean? Somebody who doesn't appear to have their own independence. I mean, my mum, rest her soul, used to say to me, and she was educated in Pakistan and came over here in the late 60s, to never be financially dependent on a man. Not to say there's anything wrong with men, just to always be your own independent self. Now, there are some who just, don't have that opportunity. So I think it's to be vigilant all throughout society and throughout the criminal justice system.
Thanks for that, Mariam.
I think I think one of the ways in which this issue is being confronted is with the domestic abuse bill. I think actually, if you're going to try to take a step back, and so obviously one's in a sense looking at things before one gets to the fact of a woman offending and then being sent to prison. I do hope that domestic abuse, which is sadly so rife and is also sadly so under wraps somehow, sees the light of day a bit more, and that there is legal aid for all those who are the subject, the victim of domestic abuse. And I believe that moving in that direction is again going to have an impact. So although I'm afraid I'm unable to answer Anna's question, what is it that will protect people instead of punishing them? I think actually, if I may say so, that has a much wider resonance for me, because I know that many, many people with mental health issues are disproportionately in the criminal justice system and in prison, and that's not the right place for them either. So I think there are a lot of societal issues that we need to address, which we need to sort of take a step back before we get to that point where they are before a court and up for sentence. So I'm afraid I don't have an answer for Anna, but it does seem to me that these kind of appreciation and recognition that these are issues is a step in the right direction.
May I add to what Amanda has just said, which is that over the last 2 years, I've been writing a number of articles about, as I'm sure we're all aware, the rise of domestic abuse during lockdown and in the pandemic, and how it can disproportionately affect people from the BAME community. Can I just say that I know that a number of people don't like that subscription, members of that community don't like that description, but it's how the data is collected. I think domestic violence, I think for some people is still taboo. And I think we should look at it across all areas. I mean, one of the things that I've done a number of cases on, which have attracted a lot of public attention because they're still seen as unusual, is domestic violence where in fact the victims are men. And that is seen as even more taboo in coming forward. And so I think there has to be a strategy across the board to assist and recognise domestic violence wherever it exists, and to seek to empower the people who need the help without prejudices. But that's something that I think we as a society have to do.
I would like to add to that as well, and really echo Mariam's point about domestic violence also affecting men. In an organisation called Restored that I'm a founder member of, we were surprised when we received a request from a man to have a male kind of enclave within the society. And he told his own story as to how there was nowhere he could go with his problems of domestic abuse. Because when he went to the police, he was told, you're a man, stand up against her, but please don't hit her, because if you do, then immediately action will be taken against you. But you're a man, go and sort it out. And they almost kind of laughed at him. There are no male refuges, there are no male places that men can go and actually have their issues taken seriously. So it is a very big issue. But one of the things we need to do is look at those organizations, those voluntary organizations that are helping people who are victims of domestic abuse, whether they're male or female. And at the moment, and I'm sure you'll bear this out, during the pandemic, their resources have gone down, their funding has gone down, and their numbers have gone up. So something like 2/3 more people are actually using their lifelines and so on, but they haven't got the resources to actually do the counselling and have the protective help and the advisory help that all of these people need. So if we are hoping to not put people in prison and protect them before they come to the point of offending, having gone through a very difficult background or a lot of abuse, then we also need to have the kinds of protective resources available in our society which they can utilize, because we can't operate without that. We have to do it as a whole. We have to have all of the resources in place so that everything is working together.
Thank you for that, ladies. Just wanted to comment on something that Lynn said in the chat, which was the comment that she made that was hair-raising. She actually made in the House of Lords, so please do go and look at the debate. And Laura said that she nearly choked on her tea, but she agrees. So do have a look at the chat, everybody. But Lynn has raised the name of a couple of organisations or people related to FGM. Do you want to flick through the chat, Jermaine, and just flag those to us?
Yeah, so Lynn has mentioned Nimco Ali, who's been at the forefront of the UK and Somali campaigns, and Efua Dorkin as well, who is deceased, but So they are two people. And also just to flag that Jenny's put the contacts of a few organizations just in case anybody would like to have a chat after this. So yeah, it was Nimco Ali and Efua Dorky.
Can I also mention, if Elaine will forgive me, but there is now provision, it's not nearly enough and it's only embryonic at this stage, for refuges for men. And in fact, there is a dedicated male domestic violence charity, the Mankind Initiative, that is seeking to go forward. But I think we view that in tandem with also the help that's needed to women whose first language may not be English. And that I think has particularly come to the fore in the pandemic, because their access to actually ask for help and to actually make their voices heard whilst they're locked with their abuser, or while anyone is locked with their abuser, I think is something that has been commented on in the last 18 months and we're all acutely aware of.
Jermaine, I'll come to you in a second to raise any questions that you think might be quite interesting from the chat. But I just wanted to go back to a point that Amanda made, which was about legislation being at the core, or one of the primary steps in dealing with you know, many of the issues that women have to face in the law. And I was looking at the work of Vera Hobhouse MP, and she was the MP who brought the upskirting legislation. But one of the things that she's tabling is a bill to make misogyny a hate crime. I was just looking through all the bills coming through Parliament in the next term or so, and I noticed this. And I just wondered what you think about it. She says that gender-based violence is a problem that has not gone away and disproportionately impacts women. So the broad summary of the bill is that she wants to make misogyny a hate crime. What do you think of that, Elaine?
Misogyny is a hate crime. So, I mean, it's a hateful crime. And I'm not sure what kind of legal parameters or what kind of legislation will be necessary in order to get that on the statute books as a hate crime, and how it will be defined. Because from what I understand, it's something that has to issue in action of some kind or another. Misogyny really is a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the attitude that a person has towards other people. And you can't really, it's not easy to legislate for that until it's actually put into practice in some way or another. So that's the problem I have always with both the law and implementing the law and changing the parameters in society. I think the law is absolutely essential, and those societies where the law isn't there, you see a massive difference. I mean, and it's only when the law changes in those societies and women are protected through legislation that things begin to happen that are positive. I have a lot of experience with the Congo, and that's certainly true there. But the law and then the implementation of the law are not enough on their own. And you have to change people's attitudes towards one another. And where do we do that, and how do we do that? And we have to do it in education. We have to do it in social media, I'm afraid, because the stuff that you get on social media now is actually itself hateful. And some of it is very misogynist, but so far as we know, it's very difficult to rule that in and change the structure of that. And then people's attitudes deep down that are not, that don't erupt into some kind of practice, stay and fester in society until such a point when they begin to raise their ugly heads in practical behavior. So I think it is very important, and I'm all for making misogyny a criminal offence, but I'm not sure how one would do it, and then how it will be implemented and how it would change, because the sociology of it, the psychology of it, and actually the whole attitudinal apparatus needs itself to be changed.
May I say something following on from that? I agree, it should be all about education. We now have, and it was enacted a number of years ago, a racial aggravation of an offence, because it's been recognised that should be a higher form of a particular criminal offence, so racially aggravated common assault, racially aggravated assault occasioning actual bodily harm. We have, as I'm sure many will know, sentencing guidelines, which are issued by the Sentencing Guidelines Council for a number of offences across the board, from rape, sexual offences to fraud, to in fact a guideline on domestic violence. And they actually recognise within them that if an offence has a gender aggravation or a sexual orientation aggravation or a racial aggravation, then that's something that the court should look at. That's different to it being an offence. And I do think I completely understand what Elaine is saying about it. Actually, we have to look at ourselves and the unconscious bias and prejudices that we all carry. One of the things that I often, in fact, I routinely do in rape cases where it in fact is required, but I do it in domestic violence cases and honour-based violence cases. And I ask the judges when I'm a practitioner to do it. Some agree, some don't, but I always do it in my speech, is I effectively do a form of the myths and assumptions direction, which is something that in rape cases is given to juries. And so when I speak to a jury, if I do it on a rape case, if I do it on a domestic violence and honour-based violence case, explain to them that, you know, it's very hard. You have to put emotion to one side. That's one of the directions. You have to coldly and clinically look at the evidence, but you have to be aware of your myths and your assumptions. And there's no one type of victim. There's no one type of offender. There's no person, for example, one of the standard rape directions that's given is that, you know, victims don't all put up a fight. They don't all scream help. They don't all immediately make a complaint. Some can take decades to complain. I'm doing a case at the moment, which is a 40-year-old historical sex case. So everyone deals with it in their own way. So inroads are being made to try and deal with the assumptions that exist and the myths that exist. And a lot of research, and many of you will have heard of Professor Cheryl Thomas, who does a lot of work with juries. And she's specifically been looking at juries. She talks to juries after they've delivered verdicts to try and ask them questions. And it's very often gender-based questions that she asks them. There's still work to be done, but it has started.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I think it's a bit of a complicated issue, to be honest, because unless there is an outward manifestation of the misogyny, then what you're doing is you're punishing somebody for freedom of thought. And it's not that I'm encouraging misogyny, but first of all, I think one has to think about freedom of thought and as a generalization and where the lines should be drawn. And secondly, practically speaking, if it is just an inward concept, or even if it's articulated other than in an aggravating way, and I think that's perhaps a way forward, actually, personally. But what you're doing then is you are making real inroads, I think, into individual freedoms, and it's just going to be very, very difficult to police. What I think along with my colleagues is on this panel is that we need to educate society and we need to change social mores. I'm not sure, having said that legislation can be a great driver for change, I'm not sure that this is the right way around, but it's not something I've really investigated. But those are things perhaps to watch out for, even if you're in favour of it, that it might have unintended consequences.
One of the problems, of course, is misogyny is often left for women to police. So as a woman academic, I found when I was a much younger woman, but right through my academic career, there were many of my students who were frankly misogynist and did not want to be taught by a woman, because even though they knew nothing and were new to the subject, they actually felt that they were superior to me because they were men. And very often, even in the lecture theatre, you'd have this standoff where some idiot, really, who knew next to nothing, would start to take me on and nitpick in a very silly, childish kind of way, just to show me really who was boss. And for a while, I just tolerated this and went along with it. And then afterwards decided, no, I'm not going to do that because it's harmful for him. He needs to learn this. So then began to set up a kind of counseling enterprise within the academic structure so that I could pick out these guys and say, okay, I need to talk to you and we need to have this extra seminar. And I would sit down and feed back to him everything that I thought he was actually exuding, and the attitudes that he had towards me, which I was sure weren't just towards me, but towards women in general, and then leave it with him. And very often they would go immediately into denial and very angry about it and so on. Who was I to be preaching to him like this, etc., etc. But after a while, working with those people, I found it very, very very productive, because people who didn't particularly want to be misogynist, but somehow were now trapped in it for whatever reason, found a way out. They could actually think about it, reflect on it. And in several cases, we became friends. And actually, I've got a number of people dotted around the country right now, men in good positions, leading positions, who are very grateful to me because I preserved them from attitudes that somehow or another had got into them as very young people and would have damaged them if they hadn't been arrested at a certain stage. But why should I have to be doing that? And that's the issue. Why is it my responsibility as a woman? Because I went to several of my colleagues and said, look, these guys probably need to be taken aside. And they said, it's not our issue. And so it came back to me, and I was the one who needed to do it. I think we need to have, not just in academia and the law, but everywhere, we need women and men working together on these fronts, recognizing misogyny when we see it, and working, and therefore together as a kind of union, preventing or helping those who are trapped in these kinds of systems of attitudes.
What I would say from my experience is that there's in fact stratas of this, because I'm not only a woman, I'm an Asian woman. I'm not only an Asian woman, I'm a Muslim woman. And I'm a Muslim woman who, I was leading a murder at the Bailey for the prosecution last year. I was told I was the first Muslim woman to ever do that. Now, walking around, now I don't say that to say, oh, isn't she wonderful? Isn't she big? Isn't she fabulous? I say that to be, I shouldn't. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that even now, I don't have male colleagues, senior members of the bar, who speak to me in a way that they wouldn't speak to me if I was a white man. And that's not me playing the race card or the sex card. It is the unconscious bias. And if you challenge them, and those who know me know I do, then it can be met with defensive anger. I'm not like that. That's you. You're prickly. You're difficult. But it very much exists, and I think it is education. But and I think it's across everywhere. It happens in medicine, it happens in academia, and it happens in the law, and it happens in the judiciary. And inroads are being made. Real efforts are being made, for example, in the judiciary to have more women, to have more diverse communities sitting on the judiciary. But it's a long way to go, and I think. There is an issue about fragility within people, that if you do point things out to them, they sometimes they don't want to hear it, and you just have to persevere, and you just have to carry on. But what I would say is that there are stratas, and we should be alive to all the stratas and how they interface in respect of it. And the other thing that I may say is that misogyny, I have found, and I'll be glad to hear what others think, is not simply exercised by men. It can be exercised by women on other women, because I've seen women who treat other women in a way that they don't treat men. And so I think we have to recognize this in all its forms.
So I'm not sure I'd call that misogyny. And I think perhaps I have a bit of a problem with the word, because it seems very extreme to me. But it probably won't surprise you to know that in my job, I'm, well, obviously there are many more women in senior positions than perhaps there ever have been. But before I was chair of the bar, I was chair of the International Committee of the Bar for 4 years, and met lots of international lawyers, many of whom are fantastic. But I would walk into the room with colleagues of mine from the bar or the Bar Council, and this person would come striding across, walk straight past me, and shake the hand of the man who was nearby. And I felt so sorry for that poor man whose hand was being shaken, because they were mortified. And, you know, they're trying to wriggle out without offending the other person. And at the same time, they're very keen because they don't want to think that they're taking my place, that, you know, that they've got to get it done quickly. And yet, so I think there's just a lot of societal norms, and they're right across the world. And we're seeing them playing out to some extent, I think, in America at this very moment, which just have to change. And the best way to change them is very difficult to divine. And I suspect there isn't a single best way. I expect there are lots of different ways in which we have to confront and change things.
And we can make a lot of mistakes.
What I would say is that I perhaps, with respect, don't necessarily agree with Amanda's description of societal norms. I think that there is a great deal of unconscious bias that exists. And I think it very much exists in the justice system. And I know one of the things that's often talked about is equality and diversity and unconscious bias training across the board for those who are primarily within that system, simply to deal with what does happen. One of the things that I'm sure people will have been made aware of is there's been recently guidance given to the judiciary about the fact that there is a real racial noticeable difference in the sentencing of Black men when they're with firearms offences. And that's something that's just been issued by the senior judiciary to remind the other judiciary that they have to remember the general principles of sentencing, because the figures have been rather stark in relation to that. And I also think it's about visibility and representation. It's seeing women in senior positions, it's seeing women who are judges, who are senior lawyers, and who can be there to be part of the conversation. This is not about men versus women, this is about men and women together, making it better. But I do think there is biases that do need to be educated and recognised.
Thank you for that. And Elaine, I'm aware that you wanted to say something, just to flag that we've probably got about 15 minutes left. To be fair to Vera, what I was reading out was a tweet, so she only had 240 characters to describe her bill. And what I think she was getting at was that she wants to make misogyny or any kind of crime, any element of hatred towards a woman. So she's talked about gender-based violence. So I think it's more about an aggravating feature as opposed to prosecuting misogyny, which I don't think would be possible, to be honest. But I wanted to flag a couple of things that have been raised in relation to rape. Mariam mentioned the concept or the fact that women who have been subject to sexual assaults, and indeed men, may not necessarily protest or indicate that they're unhappy, you know, visibly or by fighting back, etc. And I was actually, and this also links to the idea of us as a community having to be aware of things that are happening around us. And I was reading just a couple of days ago about the cases of J.C. Dugard and Elizabeth Smart, who were young children, teenagers who were kidnapped. This was in America, and they were held hostage and subject to significant sexual violence for a period of, in Elizabeth Smart's case, it was a few months, and with J.C. Dugard, it was for several years, roughly 18 years, I think. And in those cases, there were so many opportunities for the community to identify that there was something very strange about these young girls walking around with these you know, very odd looking men who appeared to be controlling them, but so many opportunities were lost. So that is entirely, you know, it's something that's very relevant and fresh in my mind completely. And following on from that, I noticed that Kevin has put in the chat a link to the CPS consultation, which is closing in a few days' time. Really important for anybody who's attending to tell anybody who's not here and those who will watch later on YouTube that it's so important to contribute to that consultation. It's a really important one, and the deadline is in a few days' time. So please do take a look at that. Amanda, do you know anything about that consultation, or can you just describe it in a nutshell if you know anything of it? But if you don't, that's
I'm going to have to pass that one. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll come back to you on another issue because I think that there are other things happening in the chat. So Jermaine, would you like to just update us on what's happening?
I mean, there's a lot. So I think this is one of those conversations where an hour and 15 minutes has gone by and it's felt like about 20 minutes. So we're kind of running short on time, but lots of really interesting points. So both Michelle and Sam have linked to some interesting organizations that support kind of global majority or ethnic minority, whichever way you want to describe it, women, and Sam, a domestic abuse charity that supports women. There are also lots and lots of questions coming in. So if you don't mind, I will ask one of those. It's kind of been asked twice. So it's from, the one that I'll ask is from Helena. Hi, Helena. I know Helena. And she asked, should more money be allocated to community projects which support women and can be preventative rather than on prisons which are more reactive?
Yes.
Yes, can I just add this, that the Lord Chancellor's putting forward a new sentencing regime really for discussion, and one of the things that he's trying to do is to divert many people away from certainly from the sentencing into custody, and and actually more broadly. And it seems to me, I mean, he's also, I have to say, also making other sentences much longer, so I'm not so keen on that. But in relation to ways in which you can have alternative ways of addressing behaviour, I think it's incredibly important, both in relation to supporting victims, but also perpetrators, because somebody else talks about perpetrators having mental health issues and other issues, and you know, these things are complicated. There isn't a goodie and a baddie always, or even sometimes, and I think it's really, it was actually quite a refreshing and surprising moment to me that there are, I thought, possibly, optimistically, a new way of looking at sentencing. And it's particularly important, I think, for young offenders, because as soon as you get young offenders into the justice system, or people who are at risk of being a young offender, you change their life forever. And a bit like Elaine was talking about, people who had convictions for prostitution. How do you decriminalize somebody who's got caught up in a system when they're very young? And it seems to me that a lot of potential and a lot of opportunities are lost at the moment to ensure that as many people as possible can be useful and fulfilled members of society. So I'm afraid I haven't quite answered the question, but it was a springboard for me, perhaps.
Can I go back to the question, if you're happy, Isabel, on the rape consultation, which expires on the 18th of January. So those of us who prosecute rape have to be specialist prosecutors, what's called part of the RASO team. And officers who defend them have to be specialist rape officers. But as I'm sure we all know, last March, the figures came through for the rape conviction rate, and it was 1,000 down from the previous year. And as a result, Max Hill, who's the Director of Public Prosecutions, issued a plan called RESO 2025, which is a 5-year plan to try and offer support and more training to those who investigate and prosecute these matters. And then the consultation, which is about to expire, as I understand it, is a follow-on from those sorts of thinkings. And so it's asking whether what's called the code for Crown prosecutors, where one has to look at effectively what's called the tests for bringing a case, and it's the public interest in bringing a case, and whether the evidence provides what's called a realistic prospect of conviction, whether that's the right test. The consultation is asking about rape myths. The consultation is asking about how, what we call, we build cases to get them to court, and whether any particular groups of society need to be protected or treated in a different way. So I think it's important for everyone, wherever you are, to participate in these sorts of conversations. Because there's clear, as you've asked about female genital mutilation, there is very much still more to be done in terms of the prosecution and investigation of rape. Very much is being done, and training and work, and it's moving forward, but it can always be improved.
And there are whole issues about the meaning of consent and the understanding of consent. And I think that those have got to be explored too. And I hope that they will come up in this consultation, particularly with regard to mental health problems, because I believe it's still the case that people with mental health issues can be raped with impunity. And it's increasingly difficult to bring a rape case against a perpetrator in that situation.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean,
That's very helpful.
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the more vulnerable the victim, the harder it is to get either a prosecution or a conviction, and that's a terrible irony.
Yeah.
And I think last year, Dame Vera Baird, who's the commissioner, a victims commissioner, said that rape is being decriminalised due to a catastrophic decline in prosecutions. And we know that in 2019, only 3% of rape complaints resulted in a suspect being charged. So, you know, that no doubt that's the foundation of the consultation, because it's not that rape is a crime that is dwindling, but
No.
if one looks at the statistics, they are shocking. Can I just add one positive note though to Miriam's, and it's this, that the Criminal Justice Board, which is the board that is brings together all of the criminal justice players, police, Home Office, Ministry of Justice, police, prisons, probation, all sorts of people, and the Bar Council and the Law Society are invited to the Criminal Justice Board. But a subgroup of that is a RASO group. And again, we're on that group, so practitioners are on that group. And it's been observed that the rise in police recording is happening in parallel in the volume of police referrals to the CPS charges. So, you know, there's a serious problem here that needs to be addressed. And my positive, it doesn't sound very positive, but my positive is that everybody now sees that it is a major problem. And I hope that there's been a tipping point and that we can now look at this and see that it needs to be changed urgently. And I think Max Hill's done absolutely the right thing in getting a longer term plan, because these things are very difficult to turn around quickly.
And can I just, following on from what Amanda has said, as I'm sure many will know, is that part of the criticism that has been levied in the last 18 months is because there was found to be what was meant to be a covert policy to drop certain rape cases that were more difficult to prosecute for statistics. And so I think this plan has very much sought to deal with that criticism. And there are things now available, both in domestic violence and in rape. And many will know about independent domestic violence advocates and workers, and rape workers, and socially, what they're called SOETs, sexually offence trained officers, whose role is there to support victims through the process. So there are positives, but there is a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think attendees might be interested, just looking at the consultation. I know that there's a big debate about the disclosure of messages on mobile phones and various social media apps and their relevance to prosecutions and the defence. So do have a look at it, because I'm very aware that many of the attendees, I know your names, etc., that you have been very involved in that kind of debate publicly. So please do enter your views in terms of the consultation, because it's really important that your views are heard. I know that Lynn, who sits in the House of Lords, is talking about the domestic abuse bill. So, Jameen, I'll just come to you in a second to ask you to just read out what she's saying in terms of her work. But things never go to plan, do they, when you've got three incredible speakers who are so full of interesting discussion. So I had planned a series of questions based on Elaine Staunton's book. So I'm just showing it now. It's called Scars Across Humanity, and it's Understanding and Overcoming Violence Against Women. It's a fascinating read. And my daughter, in fact, Elaine, was going to read it. She's studying politics for the International Baccalaureate, and so we're very proud to see that inside. And she's big note on the front saying, must keep this because it's signed by the author. But I had planned to read some excerpts from the book, which I now can't do because we've run out of time, but I'd recommend it. It's an incredibly, I don't know, it's a very rich read. And that's the best way of describing it, because everything in your brain, well, almost everything is in that book. So, you know, and Elaine's brain is quite amazing, so I'd recommend it. But I just wanted to end very quickly, so I will come to each speaker just to ask a personal question, just after I say thank you to the people who have helped. And what I'd just like you to think about is just sharing with us what it is that you are doing in lockdown to safeguard your own well-being, because you've all got very heavy duty jobs. And I'm always curious to know what tips we can pick up as the audience on how we can bring balance. So I'll come to you in just a second, but I wanted to say thank you to my incredible team, my Vice President's advisory team board, because they've done such fantastic work in preparing this webinar. You know who you are. The people who are visible to everyone on this webinar are Jermaine and Kevin. You might have seen Alex, who's doing the work in the background on the digital stuff, and Jenny, who is busy putting things into the chat, but they've been instrumental, as have many of my team, in making sure that this could happen. So I'd just like to say thank you to you. And all of you who've attended, it's lovely to have you here. Please share news of this, because it will be uploaded to YouTube. And I know that there were 100 meetings going on tonight. We chose a very popular day, so please share details of it from YouTube so that others who wanted to be here desperately can watch it. And thank you to everybody who's put comments in the chat and questions and just kept it so interesting and lively and bubbling along in a way that did not go to script. So thank you for that. And finally, I'd just like to remind you that we've got another event coming up on disability. That's the 11th of March at 7 o'clock. And we've got some brilliant speakers. We've got Dan White. I hope I've got his name right, but he's a prominent campaigner. Kevin, please put the details in the chat for me. And we've got Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson. So that is a real, you know, we've hit a real coup to be able to book those two speakers. So that's our next event. Jermaine, do you have anything you want to say before I go to our speakers very briefly?
Just a few little summary bits. So Malcolm has said a couple of times that the domestic abuse bill is going to, for the first time, include the elderly. So that's quite an interesting point. And a few people have shared that they've either had personal experience or they know of people who have experienced biases within the NHS and within the judiciary. We kind of somehow managed to have a baroness sitting in the audience listening to us, and Lynn Featherstone says that she's looking at an amendment to the domestic abuse bill to work on prevention by educating from the earlier stages to the equality of genders and right and wrong behaviour, that violence or control is never acceptable. And hopefully she'll table that next week. So that's really interesting.
Thank you, Jermaine. The reason Jermaine is so slick at doing all of this is that you lecture at university, don't you? So we were chatting in the background before coming on this webinar, and Jermaine said he's used to handling 250 students, so this would be a breeze. So he's done it. Brilliant job, Jermaine. So Amanda, do you want to share with us what you do to keep yourself well balanced during lockdown?
I walk my dog.
Yes, that's a brilliant answer, actually. And I see a lot of dog walkers in my local park, and they look, you know, I don't have a pet myself, and I always envy the way that they can so freely do things like throw a ball and run after the dog and that kind of thing. And, you know, it's such a lovely way of being a child again, I suppose, in many ways. That's
actually what I found when I was chair of the bar was there was literally no parameters on my day, especially when it was in lockdown, because I would wake up, I would have breakfast in front of my computer, I would go down at lunchtime, get my lunch, come back up, have my lunch in front of the computer. I just had masses and masses of meetings, and I literally was not moving. And so yes, I definitely needed my dog.
Amanda, and I know it hasn't stopped since you're no longer the chair of the Bar Council. We're very honoured to have Amanda today. You had meetings, didn't you? And so we're just thrilled that you fitted us in. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here.
It's my absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure, and it was a privilege being chair of the bar.
Thank you, Mariam. How about you?
Well, it's a good thing you can only see me from here, because the rest has vastly increased because of eating so much chocolate in lockdown. Watching Neighbours, an Australian soap opera and classic Bollywood films, and taking my mind off the law by getting to the grips with fractions, denominators, and all sorts of things, homeschooling my 2 kids. But mainly the chocolate.
I'm with you on that one. And I'm part of a parents' chat, lots of parents' chats, because my 4 children go to 4 different schools in 4 different towns. And we survive as parents by sending each other TikTok videos. Well, I'm not on TikTok, so I can only watch, but very funny TikTok videos that sort of sympathize with each other on the difficulties and challenges of trying to be a teacher. Many of us have wanted to resign, but we couldn't. So I'm with you on that one. And Elaine, what do you do to relax during lockdown?
Three things. First, gardening. Of course, not much gardening possible right now with the freezing fog here in Cambridge. Second, keep in touch with my grandchildren via FaceTime, and I've really loved that, and Messenger. And it may only take 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes every half day, but it really is worthwhile. And they've really opened their hearts to me during this period. And thirdly, I'm a praying person. So I pray a lot more than I did before lockdown. And actually I absorb other people's needs, because now that they know I'm praying, I get prayer requests from friends almost every day. And it's actually wonderful just to take space out and time out and pray through these issues that they're facing, and then have a message back from them saying, thank you for your prayer. I don't know what happened, but I feel really much better about life and feel more peaceful. So that's me.
Thank you for that, Elaine. Now that you've said that, I will be sending you a list. So be careful, I've got your number. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and it's been a brilliant evening. I've learned so much. It's fantastic to have you all, and we will log off now. Do have a look at us on YouTube, and please sign up for our next event in March. But in the meantime, thank you everyone, and have a lovely evening. Take care.
Thank you.